Hey everyone, welcome to Techonomics this week. I'm Jake, an analyst, writer, and engineer currently working in fintech.
And I'm Arun, an investor, educator, and product leader currently working in the autonomous space. And this week we're talking to Nitya Sharma, the co-founder and CEO of Simpl, a company aiming to make payments invisible and intelligent. Nitya, welcome.
Thanks, Arun and Jake, for having me. Excited to have this chat.
Yeah, we'll get to Simpl, we'll get to all of that, I'm sure, at some point, and what you're aiming to do. But usually how we have guests kick things off for us is just asking them, how did they get to where they are right now? Like, what was that path looking like for you?
Yeah, so this journey is definitely one of those unlikely journeys that I never planned. So the story is that we started Simpl in 2015. And prior to that, I used to live in the US. So I used to live in New York, used to work on Wall Street, and never ever thought I'll move back to India to start a payment company because I had no idea what payments are, anything. But what happened was around towards the end of 2014 and 15 timeframe, I was spending some time in India for some other reason. And one thing led to another, and my bank in India rejected my credit card application for a very simple reason that in India, I do not have a credit score. And when that happened, it kind of like made me see a few things slightly differently. And I'll just walk through three things I saw, which led to the aha moment of Simpl. The first thing I saw was very few people in India and most emerging markets have a credit card. So just to give you a sense, in India, about 900 million people have a bank account. They all have a debit card. They all have ways to make payments and so on. But only 35 to 40 million unique people have a credit card. So 4 to 5% penetration of credit cards. What I also saw about when I was sort of like spending time in India is, India is one of the fastest growing e-commerce markets in the world. But 70% of e-commerce is still done with what is called cash on delivery, which means consumers buy online or take an Uber or buy from Amazon or from a smaller store, and they would pay with real cash when the delivery happens. And that is not for the lack of unavailability of payments. If anything, everybody in India has a debit card. They can make payments if they wanted to. The consumers choose cash on delivery to build trust on the internet. They feel safer about buying things online when they pay after delivery. So when I kind of like saw all of those things, I kind of like felt in a market like India where credit cards don't exist, but today's technology does. And today's commerce does, which is sort of this new version of commerce on the internet, and of course, a very evolved consumer and merchant, there is an opportunity to reimagine the whole thing, right? If you were to build credit cards from scratch today, assuming it did not exist, what would that look like? And so that's what Simpl is. And the way we think about ourselves is we are building a brand new payment network that is intelligent for e-commerce. And so the way we think about it, the easiest way to imagine is it's a new Visa.
So it's interesting that you bring up the cash on delivery thing, because that was actually a big unlock for Uber in India, was the ability to take cash and payments, like a pure, like, the same frictionless payments that made Uber a hit in the US was actually a barrier in India to its expansion. And it's interesting that you bring up trust on that. Does that still apply? I mean, I can understand why you build trust with the merchant who you go to once, twice, 3, 4 times. Is there any reason why that would still hold true for like drivers, where like you're not building necessarily a long-term relationship? Or is it just like the same sort of like history but carried over to a new service column?
Yeah, I think Arun, that's a great question. And let me quickly step back and unbundle trust a little bit, because sometimes we use these big words, trust, and it sounds like very black and white. People are good and bad, but there is definitely nuance there. So if you think about payments, right? Electronic payments. I think the concept of what a payment is and what a payment network and the role of the network or a instrument or payment system in commerce has not evolved, although commerce has evolved. For example, so when you think about the first generation of digital payments, it's like the credit card or some sort of a Visa or MasterCard thing that has started. And that started in the 50s and 60s, correct? And prior to that, we were always using checks and cash. Now, if you think about commerce from the 50s to, let's say, the late 90s, it was purely physical commerce, which meant that you would go into a store, buy your coffee, and you know what you're getting, and you pay for it, right? Similarly, if you were to buy some T-shirt or a shirt, you'll go in and sort of look at the shirt, touch it, go to the changing room, try it, feel good, and go to the thing and just buy it. Long story short, a transaction in that world, and mostly physical world, is a point in time, right? The transaction starts and ends, in a few minutes. And therefore, payments reflected that, right? So it's a perfect contract. You give me the shirt, I give you money, whether it's a credit card or something, and the transaction is over. Now, when you think about digital commerce, e-commerce, and of course, e-commerce, one of the things about e-commerce is there is multiple versions of it, right? Something like an Amazon is e-commerce. If you are getting grocery delivered to your house in 10 minutes, is e-commerce. Think about Uber, right? Is it e-commerce or not, right? Who knows, right? But there is this element of what I call an anatomy of transaction, right? Transaction is never a point in time, right? When I am buying on Amazon or any retailer, sure, I might be making a payment or a retailer is taking the payment, but that's not when the transaction ends. It is when the transaction begins, right? And that anatomy has never been thought of from a payment lens yet in the world, right? And this is not an India problem, this is globally, right? Credit cards don't have any idea what happens once you press a button, and everybody's solving their problems separately, right? Now, when you think about, let's say, any developed US e-commerce market like the US or China, even Europe, to make e-commerce work at scale, you always needed something that in some way, whether efficiently or inefficiently, build trust between a lot of merchants online and consumers by standardizing a bunch of things, right? It's not about, screwing one person over the other or taking someone's side. It's just like creating a set of rules and protocols so that there is a standardization and everybody knows the rules of the game. Right? So think about US. PayPal did that, right? Before PayPal, it was, free for all, like no one trusted each other. And PayPal said, okay, we'll create a layer of trust. Of course, they were a payment company, but I always think about they were a trust first company. Of course, they move money as well. In China, Alipay played a very important role there. And of course, every company uses different tools. Some people use escrow or whatever the tools are, but really with the aim of building trust in this market. In Europe, Klarna solved that problem quite well because the lack of trust is basically, from a game theory point of lens, it's like prisoner's dilemma. So if you think about cash and delivery, it's like a suboptimal outcome for everyone, purely because there is no one coordinating some sort of standard that everybody adheres to, right? Now, coming to Uber in India, yes, you're right. And I remember, Uber people telling me like, the whole vision of Uber, Travis Kalanick and all the team there were like all this get in, get out your private car. And, they held on to that thing in India for a long time, but they just could not sort of give that frictionless experience. And I think the reasons were twofold. One was payment products in India cannot even allow that from a regulatory point of view. One-click checkout is not there. You have to have a password, authenticate every single transaction through a second factor of authentication, right? And there is a technicality in India around the risk of fraud and so on is on the issuer as opposed to the merchant. So, the issuers also don't want that because they don't have other ways to manage risk.
Interesting. Just quickly. So that's actually regulated that you need to have like a 2FA for each one of your transactions?
Correct.
Wow. Okay.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah. And the second is even from a technical point of view, the issuers are, if you think about the US, right? I mean, typically it is the merchant like Amazon or Stripe Radar or Swift Signs or someone working with the merchant to help them reduce fraud or chargebacks. And the reason is the liability of fraud is on the retailer, right? In India, that's not the case. So India has very low fraud actually, but basically the user experience is just terrible. And then second is people just are getting used to trusting things online. Like, sure, a retailer would want to save your card and just give you a frictionless experience. But the flip side to frictionless is trust, right? I can tell you, trust me, I will give you this thing, just give me money, right? But you should think of like, okay, well, I will give you money frictionlessly, but how do I believe that this service will be rendered to me in the fashion that I expect, right? So there is a information asymmetry that we are fixing, which I believe is how the future of payments on the internet has to be, because the internet is not a point in time. It has its own life cycle.
It's really interesting that you bring up, every time I talk to somebody who's really deep into payments, even Jake, they always bring up the life cycle or, even Jake. I talk to you all the time. That's why I said even Jake. But they always describe it as like, this body of work or like an anatomy. Like you talk to Ahmed, you use the word anatomy, and it just immediately brought my mind back to the book Anatomy of the Swipe.
Yeah.
Ahmed Siddiqui, who we've had on the podcast. And, it is so true. Like you swipe a card, in theory, like as a consumer, the experience in the US at least is that I'm done, right? This is over. And it really, there's so many things going on past point of sale. It's a much more complicated sort of ecosystem in and of itself. And it all has to execute in 2 seconds or something like that. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and the trust that's built up too, right, in like the US market is if you have a good credit card that's backed by an issuing bank that has a lot of trust built up, you look at JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, whatever, any bank that you're going to have issuing your credit card, you know that once you swipe something, no matter what's happening on the other side, you can always dispute the charge. You can always trust in that intermediary to give you what you need and make sure that you get the services you need. And if you don't, you get the money back. And so it sounds to me like, Nitya, that's a core problem or one of them that Simpl is really taking on.
Absolutely. That's exactly what we are solving. But I want to double click there, Jake. I think so if you think about the way credit cards solve this problem of, let's call it chargeback, right? Which is obviously very consumer friendly. They take a very merchant unfriendly stance.
Totally.
It, right?
Well, all credit cards do. I mean, almost in every single step,
Right?
Not even just chargebacks. Yes.
Correct. So this credit card is a consumer first product, right? And of course, we as consumers appreciate it. But merchants actually don't like it because, they are on the receiving end of the pushback, right? I mean, like my customer is right. It is my customer. Yep. But the reality of commerce is, in commerce, the customer is not a bank's customer or PayPal's customer or someone else's customer. It's actually the retailer's customer. That's the reality.
Right? Very true. Yeah, no, I agree with that. And also, I mean, the fees themselves, right? I mean, even if you just looked at the monetary structure of what happens during a payment, right? Everything that's funneled to the merchant, right? In terms of the fees that they need to pay. So yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that.
So I'm going to bring us back because I actually started this entire tangent by bringing up Uber. And it seemed like you were trying to tell a story about your credit card getting declined that led you to found Simpl. And I just want to think, can we just get back there and follow the thread, and then we'll go back into payments, I guess.
Yeah, no, totally. So when that happened, naturally I felt, as you said, in the US, right? I lived in the US. I had my debit card, I had my Amex Platinum card, and I would never put my debit card online, right? Ever. It's my money, it's my savings, my salary. If there is fraud, if there's chargeback, it's really my problem. But my platinum card, boom, right? I can call them and I don't know what they do to the merchant, but I never had a problem, right? So, and to me, therefore, credit cards stood for trust on the internet, right? It was a layer of trust that is protecting my money that is sitting in my bank account with this whole world of internet who I have no idea about. But I hear about it on newspapers that this got hacked, that got. So when I was kind of like, encountered that problem, I kind of like saw this as starting a credit card company problem. So I thought maybe I should start a credit card company in India. And around that time, obviously fintech was getting hot in the world. And there was a very interesting company in Brazil that was getting founded, which recently did an IPO called Nubank, neobank, using data science. So I thought, how do you build the Capital One of India or a Nubank of India? And so that's what I kind of like thought. Now, mind you, I had no idea about payments or credit cards, and neither was I thinking about starting this business. I thought I'll come back to the US, New York. My plan was to start a hedge fund. That's what I was thinking. And
you missed on that one, clearly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, right? So then I kind of like got interested in this credit card problem statement, right? Like, yeah, there could be a big business to be built there. And that kind of like got me to this another rabbit hole of learning about payments. What is payments and how does it work? What is a credit card? I had no idea. And I'll just walk you through 3 insights that really made me start Simpl and like form some mission and the product roadmap and the entire strategy of what we are doing today and we'll do for the next 20 years. So the first thing that really caught my attention, which I think some of us don't realize that much, is this thing that we call the credit card. That's sitting in your pocket right now in San Francisco, New York, Mumbai, Bangalore, was actually built in the 1950s and 60s. It used to be a piece of paper with 16 digits on it where people used to call each other and like also acquiring people. And then the piece of paper became a piece of plastic. Then plastic got a barcode. The barcode got a chip and pin. And then you have a metal card and a black card and a titanium card and this card and that card. But at a fundamental level, it's exactly the same thing. The value chain that got created stayed fossilized over, decades and decades of, commerce evolving, of course, became more efficient. I'm sure in the 1950s, I'm sure they did not even have spreadsheets. So they were probably were like a bunch of paper slips and things got optimized. But at a fundamental level, it's the same thing. So that's number one. When I learned that, I was like shocked a little bit. It's kind of like using Zoom on some landline phone, right? Using landline phone to make Zoom work, right?
The back end of Zoom. Yes.
Yeah, kind of like
there's a landline.
Almost, right? To make Zoom, this podcast work. That sounded odd. And then second is then you kind of like think about this piece of plastic was never created for the internet to start with, right? And to make it work on the internet, you now need all sorts of things in the middle, right? You need some sort of a payment gateway, like a processor, like Stripe would be. Then you need some sort of a tool to reduce fraud, like SIP signs or Stripe Radar. And then you need like, I don't know, I'm sure a bunch of other things. And then you need a network like Visa. And then you need a credit bureau like TransUnion and FICO. And then you need a wallet to save your card because, you need some easy thing to save this. That was, really a 60 digits. And then you need a issuing bank who's giving you the card, right? I mean, like, value chain that is just clipping coupons, right? So that's one. The second thing was, my conclusion was, after understanding when I thought about it, okay, seems like very old school stuff is going on, but how does it lead to a problem? And so the way I distilled the problem was that this thing that we call the credit card, probably a bunch of years ago was very valuable to the market, but today it is actually adversarially aligned to the customers of commerce. So this is what I mean. In commerce, whether e-commerce or physical commerce, there are only two customers, merchants and a consumer. That's a main thing. I want to buy from you, you want to sell to me, and that's all that matters. But the biggest beneficiary of this whole thing, two people, the bank, the issuing bank, and everybody else in the middle, right, making a bunch of money. And it actually is adversarial to customers and merchants. This is how. If you think about the consumer, one of the things when I was researching business models of credit cards, one of the things I saw a data point, which is 35 to 45% of all credit card payments in the world revolve, right? Meaning people don't pay their full balance, they just, end up revolving. Obviously, it was a little bit surprising this number is 40% everywhere, right? Because I would have thought, okay, well, Americans spend a lot of money and, all of that, that's a narrative. But Japanese people are very, disciplined, and Indians are very disciplined, and middle class people are disciplined and so on. But doesn't matter where you're in the market, Russia, Africa, India, Japan, US, this number is somewhere around 40%. Now, we all know when you revolve, in the US, you're paying, I don't know, about 24% compounded annualized interest rate. In India, that number is 40%.
Wow.
In Brazil, that number is 110%. In Russia, that number is 40%. In Japan, where there is no cost of capital, it's negative, and risk probably is very low, it's in like high 20s to mid 30s, right? And obviously, what you appreciate about the business model of a credit card is this revolver is the biggest revenue stream. That's how you make money. So if you're a product manager there or a CEO, your goal is to have some 30 to 50% revolving, right? Because that's how you make money. But revolving is super bad for the consumer, right? Regardless of whether you are revolving at 24% or 40% or 100%, all of that is financial suicide. No one should ever do it, right? And we saw these things in the US play out during the financial crisis. And here is a market, which is like a multi-trillion-dollar market, which is basically what is good for the customer is bad for the issuer of the card, and what is good for the issuer of the card is bad for the customer. I mean, there is some conflict there, right? And when you look at the merchant side, it's a similar conflict, right? The retailers are paying crazy amount of MDR. As you know, these numbers are all over the place. 2.5% in India, 3% in the US, some other percent somewhere else. And if you think about where is a lot of this money going, you realize a decent amount of money of this money is going to fund consumers' loyalty rewards, which we all love, right? But the question is, who does it build loyalty to? Again, it builds loyalty to the bank. And who's paying for it? It's a retailer. Every year, $200 billion are paid by retailers around the world. Every year, $200 billion US dollars to basically make this whole thing work. So to me, it was very clear. The fundamental opportunity of internet and technology and, is, can you not only build better products and sort of like use new technology and make things more efficient, but can you align yourself as a business with your own customer, right? Very much like an Amazon type approach, right? I mean, Amazon is giving you more and more value in Prime, but not charging you more and more for each value, right? And obviously technology allows you to do that while making money, but you just have to take a long-term approach and not a quarterly approach, right? So to me, it was very clear, right? The opportunity, and then if I want to spend my next 10, 20 years doing something, sure, building a credit card company could be interesting and probably, there is definitely an opportunity there, but wouldn't it be interesting to build the next Visa, which is more aligned to merchants and consumers? So that's sort of how we sort of like started Simpl. And very quick anecdote here, which I think will probably bring this whole story home. As I was thinking about it, right, building Visa is all cool, but, the question is, what do you do next, right? What do I do tomorrow? Is the question. What is my product? One of the things, as I was living back in India, I noticed myself do was in my neighborhood. So I lived in a upper middle class sort of neighborhood in India, in Mumbai, and all the stores near me were running a, what we call in Hindi, Khata, Khata. In other words, it's an account or a tab, store account, right?
Mm,
Just like opening a tab in some
in a
store,
bar.
right?
Yeah.
At like a bar, right? So my grocery store, the dry cleaning guy, the milkman, newspaper guy, the pet store, the wine store, all of these guys ran a tab. And that was very interesting, right? I was like, wow, I'm here. This is sort of like a credit card. It happens in big cities like Mumbai and Bangalore and Delhi in India. It happens in small cities and villages. Rich people use it, poor people use it, old people use it, young people use it. Not only we all use it right now, we've been using it for thousands of years. No one is building it. There's no product. There's absolutely no technology. It used to be a piece of paper and pen 1,000 years ago. It's still a piece of paper and pen today. I jokingly call it the decentralized ledger, right? That's, the most decentralized ledger sitting in people's pockets. And so I was like, wow, I mean, like there is something here, right? Where, what is the first principle here, right? I mean, like, despite that no one is building it, there's nothing to really support it. It's still, has stuck around. And you probably have heard about this. Nassim Taleb calls it the Lindy Effect. Anything that's been around for X amount of years in the past is likely to exist in the next X year, same X year in the future. And so obviously that begged the question: what is the fundamental? What is the anthropological origin of it, right? In commerce. And so when I saw it from that lens, there were two insights that forms the mission and the product strategy for Simpl. So as I said, there are two customers in commerce, merchants and consumers. The reason a retailer gives a tab or an account or a khata to their customer is it helps them build a independent relationship of trust with their customer, right? And the three keywords are independent, relationship, and trust, right? Every retailer wants to do it, small, big, online, offline, Indian, American, African, Japanese, right? On the consumer side, one of the things we say at Simpl as we think about consumer side user experiences is that the best payment experience is no experience. No one ever woke up in the morning and said, I want to make 5 payments today, or let me go to the Starbucks to make a payment, or go to Amazon to make payments. And it's just like something has to happen. And the best experience is basically nothing, zero. And so to me, it was very clear, right? This khata is exactly that. You don't even make a payment. You just walk in, walk out, wave your hand, right? And of course, from a merchant point of view, there is such a desire and demand to build this relationship of trust. So what I said was, if I'm able to take the concept of the khata, put it on the internet, right? So that online retailers can do the same thing with their customer and build relationship of trust, and the customer gets a great user experience. And then if we connect these khatas or tabs or ledgers on a common network, like Simpl, where the network owns the identity layer, the trust layer, and the risk layer, because obviously there is risk and anything go wrong, then what happens is you can one scale it. And on the consumer side, you're not getting one bill from this retailer and the other bill from the other retailer. You just get one bill for everything, which is nothing but a new credit card, except there is nothing of the old world that is here. Right? So that's sort of the rabbit hole that sort of one step at a time kind of like led to Simpl.
And when you say that it's sort of nothing of the old world, you're referring to mostly like the stack at which it's built upon, the old Cruft, the Visa, the MasterCards, the old card companies in the traditional sense of credit card. And then I have a question because I think the nature of trust between the merchant and the Kata, is that how I say it?
Khata.
The Kata? But
Mm.
the Kata is a lot more personalized, right? It's like this person comes in, I know their face, I know exactly who they are. Yes, maybe the burden of trust and the burden of risk of lending money to this person on this tab is on me, but generally, like, I know where they live, quote unquote. That's a very famous movie line and many. But generally, like, you have a more deep relationship. How do you feel like the customers of Simpl, in terms of the merchant customers, are really starting to grab on to this concept of like the online version of Kata? Because it does seem to me like that does remove a lot of the depth of that personalization.
Absolutely. And I think that's a unique problem to solve on the internet. And this, it's a little bit of from a product positioning and so on point of view, a little bit of work in progress. But I think if you think about, again, internet and the progression of internet and let's say commerce on the internet, and I think for the most part, everything else on the internet, we are kind of moving from, if you were to think about the internet for the last 20 years, it was for the most part a utility, getting things done efficiently, right? And when you think about what is already happening over the last, let's say, few years and sort of like projected out a few more years, we are moving to the spectrum of internet as an experience, right? Could be metaverse, there are multiple ways to think about it, but internet as an experience is what where internet is moving, right? And so therefore, what you are saying, right, that obviously in the physical world there's this personal nature which is super important, but that's table stakes on the internet also at this point, right? And while how you do it is obviously different because in the physical world is going to be different from internet, but that personalization, the trend and the importance of personalization has already started, right? And this just helps our merchants just basically open a tab on the customer. And one of the things we see very interestingly on data is it basically obviously increases things like trust and conversions and so on, but that results into increased loyalty, retention for retailers. One of the things that we can like one way to think about the tab is it's subscription. It's subscription for things that are not typically, we have not thought of a subscription. Typically, we think of subscription as something where you have to pay $10 for Netflix or Amazon Prime per month. And it's a one price, and then you get everything, bundled into one price. And then there are, and of course, in such digital services, there is no marginal cost. So you can give me more movies without incurring any cost. But there are other things that are, there is a marginal cost like food and most real world physical things. But the experience is unsubscription like, right? It's like you have to make these micro payments all the time, right? So this tab really, so the right way to think about it is, again, right? And the, I said the best payment experience is no experience. So the personalization comes not from doing something, it actually comes from not doing anything and removing it.
And so by not doing anything and removing it, you basically get, I guess, some of the benefits of old world and some of the benefits of the new world.
Basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So the model seems very similar to what I've seen in other areas. And obviously we talk about that in terms of like the India market in particular here. Have there been any other challenges specific to the region that you feel like Simpl is solving on top of just the old world model? And maybe you can see I'm digging a little bit into maybe what your future roadmap might look like for Simpl, but generally, like, what are some other areas you see as opportunity?
Yeah, the way we think about it is at a high level, what has happened on the internet over the last, let's say, 20 years is, especially on e-commerce, very large platforms like Amazon create a app like an Amazon app or website and provide consumers a phenomenal user experience, which is purely a utility right now, right? It's speed, it's cheap, it's fast, and it's easy, frictionless, one click, and so on, and builds trust for consumers to buy things online. And of course, doing really well doing so. But in doing so, they are commoditizing the retailer, right? So if you think about the customer, we are all happy with Amazon, but the retailer is not that happy with Amazon because the ownership of the relationship is with the with Amazon or a very large platform such like Amazon, like a Walmart or something. Now, as you're thinking about, what is happening today, with new tools like Shopify and WooCommerce and ease of being on the internet and building your own website, every retailer, that's the whole origin of Khata, right? Every retailer wants to be independent and they want to build a relationship with their customer, right? But the problem is traditionally it's been hard, right? So you need to plug into Amazon and just deal with their thing. So what we are building is really a sort of like a connected checkout network across the network of retailers. And again, we are neutral. We are neutral like a Visa. So we are neutral to Amazon. We are neutral to small retailer. Doesn't matter, right? But the way we are is everyone has equal access to our tools, infrastructure, and product, right? Doesn't matter whether you are, and we price it equally to everyone, right? So therefore, our entire product roadmap is around how do we keep on doing things that will increase trust across the network of merchants, that will increase loyalty across the network of merchant, and that will increase conversions, right? More people buying online across the network of merchants. So our entire product roadmap is sort of around that. So just to give you a sense, an example of something like this, loyalty rewards. We all know consumers love loyalty rewards. We all like ours. We also established that in today's world, basically loyalty reward is a little bit stealing for the merchant, giving to the customer for the benefit of the bank, right? Well, can you not create a platform where merchants can give loyalty rewards to their customer, right? Of course, then the question is, how do you curate them and give that user experience so that it's super easy to use for the consumer as well? Because one thing if you empower merchants to do so, merchants will be giving you a lot of loyalty rewards. For example, you go to a coffee shop, you get a 10th coffee free. It's equivalent to a 10% cash back, which is much higher than any other credit card you might have. But there is just not a system that has enabled that, right? So, we're working on
And
things like
integrated
that.
as well. Yeah.
And integrated and cohesive, right?
Mm-hmm.
Standardized, some sort of a, because in the end, everybody wants to do their own thing. And when you let everybody do their own thing, then basically nothing works. It's market failure. So the question is always, and it's a little bit of a, that's classic network dynamics, product problem solved. What type of standardization is the right standardization, and where do you let the market forces take over?
Makes sense. In terms of regulation, we talk a little bit about this. We talk about credit card, rates. We talk about how, it's an older system. How is Simpl regulated in the way that a credit card company might be regulated maybe in the US? Like, is there an additional layer there of complexity that you're dealing with as you're building out that roadmap you just mentioned?
Yeah. So as of now, the way Simpl works is we work with other regulated institutions, and we are a layer of software. We never touch money, right? We kind of move money through bank
Yep.
accounts, but we ourselves don't touch money. So we are basically, for the most part, a software company that invoices customers, right, on behalf of retailers, and then help collect from them and give it to the retailer. So that's what we are. Naturally, that's the most simplistic way to think about it. And we are working with regulators in India to kind of come up with the right framework to find the right structure for something like what we do.
That makes sense.
So one thing that came across just when you talked about interest rates, and I wanted to ask it then, but I guess I'll ask it now. If interest rates came down, do you think that would just automatically increase credit card penetration in a country like India?
And why would
Just because is some of the lack of penetration just due to the fact that you pay higher interest rates?
Well, no, actually, the lack of penetration is a different problem. So the thing about high interest rate is consumers don't realize it. That's a problem, right? It's all fine print. I mean, the moment anybody realizes it, there will be a revolution.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So we don't know that, right? So that's it's like silent killer, right? It's killing everyone, but no one knows it and making someone else. Right? So that's never,
at least
that's
that
not
40% revolving, folks.
Because, the funny thing is even the 40% people who revolve don't think they won't revolve when they're using it.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Or at least they don't realize how much expense, because they think about it like, oh shit, I'll pay some minimum balance. And for them, it seems like a weird deal, right? I mean, like, oh, instead of $10,000, maybe I can pay $500. It sounds like a deal. And we all know from a consumer psychology point of view how short-sighted human beings are, right? We love to optimize the month, and we forget to optimize the next 10 years or even 6 months, right?
Oh.
So that's not the problem. The biggest problem is bureau data. And identifying the right consumers from an underwriting point of view. And then equally important, a business model where the sort of the dynamics around cost of customer acquisition, cost of product delivery, and then the revenue on the product itself is kind of like, coming together. So just to give you an example, like in the US, as you know, right? I mean, credit card business has a very high CAC, cost of customer acquisition, right? Anywhere from $50 to $500. Now, in the US, obviously, for any business to have that CAC, you have to get it paid back. And if you think about in US, the average income in US is 40 times higher than something like India and most emerging markets, right? Now, there is only limited things you can do in a pure play credit market, whether you are in India or US, to reduce your CAC that much, right? Maybe you can reduce it from 50 to 25 or something, but there is a CAC, there is a big CAC. But if your income levels are 40 times less, how do you even make money?
Yeah.
Right. So you have to really think about is this correct? Like an example is mobile phones, right? If we were, let's say, there was no mobile phones invented, I can bet not everybody in India and emerging markets and Africa and Asia, even US, would have a phone in their house, right? Today, everybody has a phone. Not only they have a phone, they have internet and it works all the time, right? And the only way to sort of truly make that leapfrogging is to make some fundamental infrastructure level changes, right? Because the old thing can only go as far from an economic lens, user experience lens, problem solving lens, and what is needed in the context of today.
What other companies do you see also following along the same thing of like, okay, well, we're gonna try to append this old existing infrastructure? What are some other companies that you feel like, hey, they're doing a good job? It doesn't necessarily have to be in the space that you're in as well. Just curious.
I think few examples of these companies that we all have and know are, one is WhatsApp, right? So if you think about, and I think it's a simplistic example of, so if you think about SMS, right, which we all used at some point, it really, imagine the value chain here, right? You have a smartphone from AT&T or some Airtel in India, then you send something that goes to some tower, then tower has some deal with like Vodafone or whoever.
Telecom,
right?
Telecom contracts.
Right?
Ooh, we could go all day on that.
Exactly. And then they have these towers and like, I don't even know what happens, right? And eventually it gets to you and they'll charge you, 1 rupee per SMS, right? And all you can do is just send these texts. And now you have WhatsApp where, you can send like photographs and videos and documents and, emojis and GIFs and everything else, and be more aggressive, expressive, right? So that's the example of personalization in interaction on the internet. SMS was these 2 lines of text, hardly you can write anything, and now you can put whatever you hell want. Now, to make it happen, you really needed to leapfrog that value chain, right? Because otherwise it just will not happen, right? I think there is a statistic in India alone in the morning, more than 1 billion WhatsApp messages are sent saying good morning to people, each other, right? With like some sort of a photograph of nice morning, right? Can that happen on the SMS that we had 15 years back? It's just impossible, right? Or the cost will be so high, it will never happen, right? So that's one example. I think Airbnb is a great example of both appending the old system, but also sort of like this new way to think about experiential commerce, right? So it's not about just staying in a hotel, right? I mean, the CEO of Marriott, who I think unfortunately passed away recently, but a few years ago, in one of the in one of the conferences, he made this very interesting comment, which said something to the fact that the whole insight of Marriott and like these hotel chain was standardization. That people want to feel safe and some sort of standard. And
trust. We're back to trust.
And trust, right? And
yes.
and what he said was the whole insight of Airbnb was imperfect authenticity, right? When somebody is waking up in Cairo, they don't want to feel that we're waking up in Cleveland, right? Like, because Marriott was all about your hotel in Egypt and Mumbai and Cleveland would be roughly the same, right? Like the hotel I'm sitting in right now. But Airbnb, provides you this experience while totally solving for trust, because trust is, I don't want to stay in someone's house, right? So trust is the common thread always, but this there is a element of, there is a standardization around trust. What is the protocol when I stay in Airbnb versus Marriott and stuff? So everybody is on board. But the experience that I have, like belonging everywhere, right, which is what a lot of people of us want, is like Airbnb and Uber. And I think there are a lot of examples of that. I think Shopify is a very good example of sort of like a new status quo or a potential, right? So if you think about e-commerce being consumer centric, right, which is Amazon, almost adversarial to the merchant, not almost, they compete with the merchants, as we know. Shopify is the other side of it, right? It's complete counter positioning. It's merchant first, right? Empowering merchants to be consumer centric, right? Right. So I think these are some examples of, I think, some exciting stuff happening.
Yeah, I love the Amazon Shopify example. It's something Arun and I have talked about in previous podcasts, and also written about a few times. I think it's a very good leapfrogging example of like, hey, this value chain existed. It existed because of trust, and it seemed like the only standardized way to do things until Shopify came along and really appended all of that. That's really great to see.
It's interesting too, because you brought up WhatsApp and you brought up India. And it's so interesting to see, like Indians, for instance, they love shopping on WhatsApp. And like there's a startup that was almost just completely based around this, right? Basically Shopify for WhatsApp, centered around India. And what's really kind of interesting is, you think about something like Simpl, you think about how do you manage those payments where you're disintermediated, right? So like you have the same concept of there's a local store, but I want to browse and buy it from my phone. How do you enable that, that experience that is local but is global in that it's electronic, right?
Yes, I see the question, Arun. But I think one thing that I strongly believe in that is happening in the world today is there is a big blurring of the line of what is local and global, especially on the internet. Because internet is one thing, right? There's no different internet for different markets. It's just one market. And which is why you are seeing these internet companies becoming very fast global companies, right? So WhatsApp for India is not some other WhatsApp. It's the same WhatsApp that you use, right? Spotify for India is exactly the same Spotify. Airbnb for India is exactly the same Airbnb. Amazon for India is exactly the same Amazon. Of course, we have some versions of those things also, like Flipkart and Ghana and Ola. Uber for India is Uber, right? And by the way, Uber for Nairobi is exactly basically Uber, right? And in Tokyo, it's the same thing, right? So I guess the point is
Yeah.
that the consumer on the internet is a horizontal consumer class. It's not an Indian consumer anymore, or an American consumer anymore, or an African consumer, or a Japanese consumer. It's the same consumer. And they are getting more and more homogenized and spoiled for choice and for experience, right? And so therefore, yeah, I mean, so I think it is less productive and less valuable to think about customizing that in that way for local markets. The question is always to ask the fundamental question: what is at the most basic level? What is the merchant and like in commerce? What does the consumer want, right? And so consumer wants trust and experience. That's all they want, right? And again, that's true for all consumers around the world on the internet, right? Similarly, on the merchant side, what do they want? They want trust and they want relationship and they want to sell more. That's all they want. Now, obviously, how you implement it might be slightly different in different market. Definitely, local market nuances. But when it comes to the experience, we're really getting to a point in the world where it is just like really converging into a unified experience globally.
Yeah, I think you answered the question I was trying to ask and asked poorly, so thanks for that. I think we could probably have this conversation all day, but we have a tradition on Techonomics that we sort of ask at the end of every podcast, which is we ask a guest for a hot take. And I call this Papa Jake's Hot Takes because Jake became a father recently and the branding works. Jake, do you want to present Nitya with his hot take?
I would love to. All right. So the hot take today, Nitya, is we've been talking a lot about credit cards today. We've been talking a lot about fees. We've been talking about leapfrogging. And some recent news over the last, I would say, few months has been a real large dispute between Amazon and some of the large credit card brands, namely Visa, in terms of either surcharges adding for additional charges to the customer for using a Visa credit card in Singapore and Australia, or even in the UK, just dropping support entirely for Visa. What are your thoughts on that and how it relates to Simpl, but more or less just your gut reaction to that news?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing is very clear. The legacy payment value chain, where Visa is obviously the network, Visa and MasterCard, is a rent-seeking value chain. It has stopped serving the customers, right? Now, when you're a very large merchant, like an Amazon or Walmart, you can fight back, right? And they are fighting back. They will fight back. But when you're a small merchant, you can't fight back, right? What do you do? Right? So one other, I guess, just adding to that hot take, you probably heard about it last week. Visa and MasterCard jacked up the rates for merchants even more. Small merchants, right? Why? Well, their business in Russia is getting killed and they need revenue to meet their quarterly target, and otherwise their stock will go down. And there's no long-term alignment here, right? And merchants are already struggling with high credit card fees already, right? And of course, for a normal merchant selling in India or San Francisco or New York, they are least concerned with inflation and, Russia and Ukraine, everything else. They're just trying to run their business in very, very thin margins. And here it is, $1 trillion market cap just jacking up prices again, right? And these guys have no way to even say anything, right? Now, I think obviously the future is that a large merchant like Amazon will fight back, and they are fighting back, and they will probably win. The question is, what does a small one do, right? And that's what we are doing. We are building that tools and infrastructure so that they don't have to fight back because they don't need to use them.
So I guess the answer to the hot take is you've got it handled.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, it'll take a few years, but we are building for the small retailer who wants to be competitive online and does not have to depend on either competitive elements like large platforms or like this payment network that basically doesn't work. Like think about the fixed cost of credit card payment, like 29 cents, right? Why, right? Does not allow micropayments, right? But it does make a lot of money for everyone in the middle.
For sure. I feel like we could talk to you all day, and I know you have another meeting, so I guess we'll have to end here for now, but I'm hoping you'll come back at some point, especially as Simpl grows, and we'd love to check in with you again. And thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me. This was a great chat, guys.
Hey everyone, Arun and I are extremely grateful to have you as a Techonomics listener. As a reminder, the views expressed in the content of this podcast or anything linked in the newsletter, website, posts, or posted in social media or other platforms are that of our own and are not the views of any person, company, entity, or even any related affiliates. The content is not directed to any investors or even potential investors. It does not constitute an offer to sell or is a solicitation of any offer to buy any securities. It may not be used or relied upon in evaluating the merits of any investment. Thank you.